Leo Major did not look like the kind of soldier who would rewrite the ending of a battle, let alone the fate of an entire town during World War II. He was small, wiry, and quiet, the sort of man who blended into a crowd rather than commanded it. Born in Montreal, raised during the Depression, he learned early that life did not owe him anything. His father was harsh, demanding, and sometimes violent. Home was not refuge but resistance. Others broke under that kind of pressure. Leo hardened. He developed a stubbornness that bordered on defiance, a pride that refused to bend. When war came, he enlisted not for glory, not even for patriotism, but because no one, not his father, not society, not the world, was going to decide the limits of Leo Major. What no one knew then was that this quiet young man would become the only soldier in World War II to liberate an entire town by himself, and that legend would begin with a single moment that should have ended his career forever. In 1944, during the grueling Normandy campaign, Leo was serving as a scout with the Régiment de la Chaudière, a reconnaissance role that meant you saw the enemy before the enemy saw you. On a routine patrol, a German armored vehicle spotted his team, and in the chaos that followed, Leo took a blast of phosphorus grenade shrapnel to the face. His left eye was ruined. The world turned into smeared light and pain. The medics told him the truth. He was lucky to be alive. Better men had died from less. They patched him up, sent him to the rear, and prepared to evacuate him home. But Leo refused. The army considered him half-blind. To Leo, it meant less target to distract him. He signed off his release papers against the recommendation of every doctor in the tent, declaring that a sniper only needed one eye to shoot. Most soldiers spend the war trying not to get sent to the front. Leo fought to go back. His commanders thought he was either fearless or insane. His comrades, who watched him return to battle with part of his face wrapped in bandages, concluded it was both. And so the one-eyed sniper was born, not by legend, but by Leo's refusal to surrender even when his own body betrayed him. War has a strange way of reshaping identity. For most men wounded in combat, the injury becomes a scar they carry. For Leo Major, losing an eye became a sharpening stone. Depth perception, peripheral vision, head movement, all of it changed. But Leo adapted quickly in ways the medical staff could never have predicted. Without the distraction of dual focus, the world narrowed into cleaner lines. Shadows contrasted more distinctly. Movement registered faster. He could look down the barrel of his weapon with a singular concentration most shooters never achieve. Fellow soldiers joked that losing the eye made him deadlier, and they weren't far off. Leo developed an uncanny ability to sense angles and threats without needing a full field of vision. He spent hours studying terrain, mapping German artillery positions and memorizing patrol routes. His commanders, initially hesitant to deploy a half-blind scout, realized they had something unique, a soldier who refused to concede limitation and turned it instead into clarity. Within months, Leo earned a reputation as the man you sent when you needed someone to see what others couldn't. But his transformation wasn't limited to reconnaissance. Leo possessed an audacity that bordered on myth. During operations in the Scheldt estuary, he captured not one, but 93 German prisoners in a single mission. It was the kind of statistic that normally lived only in propaganda leaflets. Yet here it was, signed off in reports written by officers who could barely believe it themselves. The capture wasn't accomplished through brute force, it was accomplished through psychology. Leo moved silently through mud and trees, appearing in unexpected places at unexpected times. German troops, exhausted and increasingly disillusioned as the Allied advance pressed on, saw the shadow of a sniper rather than the figure of a single man. When Leo emerged through the fog and ordered surrender, they didn't debate it, they complied. His one eye gave nothing away, and his voice carried the confidence of someone who had already decided the outcome. Later, he discovered one of the Nazi officers he captured belonged to the SS, a detail he did not take lightly. Leo despised the SS not because they were the enemy, but because he had seen firsthand what they did to civilians. He beat the officer senseless and turned him over barely conscious. His commanders reprimanded him only formally. The men in the regiment understood. You can train a soldier in marksmanship, navigation, and discipline, but you cannot fabricate moral fury. Leo carried his with him into every patrol, every confrontation, every shot that needed taking. His injury didn't slow him, it clarified him. And soon the war would deliver a moment that demanded everything he had become: the hunter, the scout, the myth taking shape, because one small Dutch city was about to face a night of fear, retreat, and unexpected salvation. By April 1945, the war in Western Europe was nearing its end, but liberation was rarely simple. The German army still held strategic towns across the Netherlands, wired with explosives, fortified with machine guns, and commanded by officers under strict orders not to surrender. Zwolle was one of those towns, a small Dutch city with a population that had endured occupation, starvation winters, and the constant threat of reprisals. For the Canadian forces advancing through the region, Zwolle was an obstacle that could not be bypassed. Intelligence suggested the Germans were preparing to destroy parts of the city if forced into urban combat. Bridges, municipal buildings, and key crossroads were believed to be mined. A full assault risked turning Zwolle into rubble and slaughtering the civilians trapped inside. The regiment prepared accordingly: artillery coordinates, support plans, reconnaissance routes, the standard grim routine for taking a town street by street. But standard war plans are built for numbers, not individuals. That night, the plan was to shell Zwolle, advance with armor, and engage in house-to-house combat at dawn. Civilians would die, soldiers would die, buildings that had stood for centuries would fall in hours. That grim arithmetic was war, until Leo Major decided it didn't have to be. When the call went out for volunteers to scout the town before the assault, it was expected to be a two-man reconnaissance, a quiet infiltration to gather information and withdraw before detection. Leo stepped forward without hesitation, but then he changed the expectation entirely. He offered to go alone. His commanders were stunned. A solo reconnaissance into a hostile town at night was as close to suicide as war offered. But Leo, shaped by a difficult childhood, refined through injury, defined by impossible victories, saw something others didn't. He reasoned that one man could move silently, avoid detection, and gather intelligence in ways a group could never achieve. More importantly, he believed that chaos, fear, and psychological manipulation could turn the Germans inside the city against their own plan. His proposal wasn't reckless, it was strategic. There was no ego, no theatrics, just the stubborn conviction that one man, unseen and underestimated, could prevent a battle thousands would remember for tragedy. As the regiment prepared for artillery, Leo marked his objective: enter the city, find German positions, create confusion, and, if the opportunity presented itself, convince an entire garrison that staying meant death. He strapped extra magazines and grenades to his gear, adjusted the band holding the glass eye he refused to wear, and disappeared into the night. No radio, no backup, no margin for error. One man walking alone toward an occupied city, lit only by moonlight and the faint glow of fires smoldering beyond its walls, ready to challenge an army. Leo slipped into Zwolle under the cover of a cold April night, the moon hanging low and pale over the rooftops that still bore scars from earlier bombings. The streets were quiet, too quiet, not the silence of peace, but the tense emptiness of a city holding its breath. Every door shut, every curtain drawn, every shadow a question. He moved carefully along the edges of buildings, his boots brushing cobblestone wet from recent rain. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once and went quiet, as if even animals felt the presence of an outsider. Leo didn't carry a map. He relied on memory, instinct, and the subtle signs of occupation: tire tracks, cigarette smoke drifting from half-open windows, faint voices behind cracked shutters, discarded ration tins. He approached a cluster of parked military vehicles and quietly counted them. German troops were still deeply entrenched, not evacuating, not preparing to surrender. Further along, Leo came across a pair of soldiers on cigarette break. He hid in a doorway, listening. One complained about rumors that Canadians were approaching. The other laughed nervously and dismissed the idea. Leo took the information as confirmation. The garrison was unaware how close danger actually was. He waited for the soldiers to leave before advancing deeper. The wind shifted. A faint smell of diesel and explosives confirmed his fear. Demolition charges were being set. If the Allied assault came at dawn as planned, Zwolle might not live to see noon. Leo understood that reconnaissance alone wouldn't save the town. Intelligence without influence was just observation. To stop the destruction, to prevent the fighting and bloodshed, he needed to create something intangible but deadly: fear. And fear, properly applied, spreads faster than bullets. He located a small cluster of officers in a commandeered house, their voices low and tense as they argued over retreat routes and orders from the German command. Leo waited until a patrol passed before crawling closer, taking a position behind a ruined garden wall almost within earshot. Then he opened fire, not wildly but precisely targeting the officer leaving the building. One shot, one confirmed hit. The others scrambled inside, shouting in confusion. Leo quickly relocated, moving through backyards and alleys like a shadow, firing again minutes later from a different direction. To the officers, it seemed like multiple teams were engaging, the first tendril of uncertainty gripping their nerves. He lobbed a grenade into an empty truck to create a blast that echoed through several streets. Soldiers woke, civilians hid beneath tables, and radios crackled with frantic German voices trying to make sense of what was happening. One man had become an army. He amplified the illusion by dragging a wounded officer's body toward a road and blocking it, planting evidence that suggested an ambush. Any logical commander would interpret these signs as the opening move of a coordinated assault: scouting parties, sabotage teams, forward units. The Germans were no longer thinking of defense, they were thinking of escape. In only a few hours, Leo had altered the entire psychological landscape of Zwolle, and the night was far from over. Confusion spread through Zwolle like a cold wind sweeping through a burial ground, unseen, chilling, and impossible to ignore. Radios squawked overlapping reports, each more chaotic than the last. Some claimed Canadian infantry had already breached the western quarter. Others shouted about snipers in the north. A few insisted armored vehicles were approaching from the highway. None of it was true, but it didn't have to be. In war, perception can be deadlier than reality. Leo knew this and used it like a weapon. He moved continuously, never firing from the same direction twice, never lingering long enough to give the Germans a chance to regroup. The Germans were trained for enemy armies, not phantoms who struck and vanished. Every muzzle flash and explosion reinforced a narrative. The Allies are here. But fear is loud, and soon it drowned out discipline. Leo overheard two soldiers arguing in the street, one demanding they hold their ground, the other insisting they had been abandoned. Leadership fractures under panic, and the cracks were widening fast. As Leo navigated deeper into the neighborhoods, he encountered German barricades hastily erected, their purpose unclear even to the men who stood behind them. He recognized desperation and opportunity. When Leo discovered the German command post, everything hinged on what he would do next. He could attack it and die. He could retreat and report, and Zwolle would burn. Or he could gamble everything on the same audacity that had brought him into the city alone. Leo approached the building through a narrow alley, careful to stay behind debris. He studied the guards, tired, jumpy, glued to the radio. Inside, officers argued heatedly. He needed them to make one decision: retreat, so he acted with precision and cruelty that war often demands. Leo climbed onto a stack of rubble, fired a single shot through a lit window, shattering glass and confidence in equal measure. The room erupted in panic, then silence. Leo shouted in flawless, authoritative German, "The Canadians are in the north. If you don't retreat now, you will all be trapped." The voice carried just enough clarity to sound nearby, just enough command to sound official. He fired again, not at people this time, but at the doorframe, sending splinters flying. Someone inside screamed to pull back before they were encircled. Another called for confirmation and received only the echo of gunfire in response. That was enough. Leo watched through the gap in the window as officers scrambled for maps and shouted orders. Within minutes, columns of German troops began withdrawing, not fighting, not burning, not destroying, retreating in formation, convinced that confrontation meant annihilation. One sniper, one night, one bluff that an entire garrison believed. Zwolle was no longer occupied, because fear had marched the army out. As dawn crawled slowly over Zwolle, the silence that settled over the city no longer felt like fear, it felt like relief. Civilians cracked open shutters, unsure whether the night sounds had been battle or nightmare. What they saw instead were empty streets, abandoned positions, German vehicles left behind with engines cold, and most shocking of all, no artillery craters, no burning bridges, no destroyed homes. The city had expected liberation by fire and steel. Instead, they woke to something unprecedented, liberation by illusion. When Leo's regiment advanced toward Zwolle, prepared for resistance and casualties, they found none. Instead, Dutch civilians waved hesitantly from doorways, pointing toward the direction the Germans had fled. It took hours before the truth reached the commanders, that the fighting reported by German radios never happened, that the bodies of German officers were the result of one sniper, not a platoon, that Zwolle had indeed been liberated by one man. Leo Major reappeared shortly after sunrise, covered in mud, exhausted and calm as if returning from routine reconnaissance. His fellow soldiers stared, some speechless, others disbelieving. One officer demanded to know how many Canadians had assisted him. Leo simply replied, "None." The statement hung in the morning air with more weight than gunfire. Word spread quickly. A single soldier had accomplished what battalions were prepared to do with shells and sacrifice. Civilians approached him with tears, bread, and thanks, his comrades with awe and quiet pride. But Leo didn't linger in the moment. There were more cities ahead. The war was not yet done. When the time came to award him the Distinguished Conduct Medal, one of the highest decorations for bravery, Leo declined it. Not because he lacked pride, nor because he doubted the significance of his actions, but because the British general who was to present the medal wore a ribbon Leo could not respect, one awarded for service during a campaign in which the general's conduct had led to unnecessary Canadian casualties. Leo was not a man who compromised principles for ceremony. He liberated a town, but refused a medal, and that refusal became as defining as the liberation itself. After the war, Leo returned to Canada briefly, but conflict had a way of calling him back. When the Korean War erupted, Leo, now a veteran, a one-eyed sniper, a legend, enlisted again. In a second war on a different continent, he led a unit that liberated another town, earning him a second Distinguished Conduct Medal. History often repeats, but rarely with the same man at the center. 2 wars, 2 towns liberated. One soldier with one good eye who never stopped believing that ordinary men, under extraordinary pressure, can alter the course of history. When Leo Major finally passed away in 2008, the city of Zwolle flew flags at half-mast, not because he was a foreign soldier, but because he was their liberator, their rescuer, their ghost in the night, the one-eyed sniper who freed a city and proved that sometimes victory doesn't arrive with armies, but walks alone under moonlight.